Welcome to City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson took office just over 3 months ago, but she's launched several proposals that could have impacts for years to come.
I, Katie Wilson, swear.
Mayor Katie Wilson says she's making progress on a campaign promise to add 1,000 homeless shelter spaces in her first year.
We are moving faster than ever before.
Her multi-million-dollar plan to add tiny homes and other shelter options has raised plenty of support and plenty of questions, too.
What is included for that cost?
Plus, Mayor Wilson has paused the expansion of surveillance cameras in Seattle amid concerns over the federal immigration crackdown. And she's wrestling with a looming $140 million city deficit.
So you can expect to hear a lot more about budgets and revenue in the months ahead.
And that's not all Seattle's 58th mayor is trying to tackle early in her first term.
Didn't expect to be the sports mayor, you know?
Yeah, I know. Assessing Mayor Katie Wilson's first 100 days. Next on City Inside Out. Thanks once again for joining us here on City Inside Out on the Seattle Channel. Brian Callanan here with you, and I am with Seattle's 58th Mayor, Katie Wilson. Mayor Wilson, great to have you here.
Great to be here, Brian.
All right, here we go. I wanted to talk about this. We're right at this milestone of your first 100 days in office here. I know you set a lot of goals during your campaign. We'll get into those during the show here. But just to start, what have the last 3+ months been like? Are you where you wanted to be? Any surprises at this point? What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a whirlwind, and, you know, mostly in a good way. But yeah, I mean, we're hitting the ground running on a lot of the big priorities that I came in with, notably shelter expansion, which I'm sure that we'll talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I mean, a lot of focus too has just really been on building a stellar team that's going to lay a great foundation for the next 4 years. So that's, you know, staffing in the mayor's office and working with our department directors, and I'm really excited. I think, you know, the vibe is good. Anything that surprises
me. Yeah.
Didn't expect to be the sports mayor, you know?
Yeah, I know. could you actually have a Super Bowl, Mariners win the World Series, and the Sonics come back during your...
And we got the World Cup coming.
Right,
you know?
right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's pretty exciting. And I've actually had a lot of fun going to some of the games. I was actually at the Mariners game earlier this week where we beat the Yankees. And,
heck yeah.
So I'm really having a lot of fun with that.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. I do want to get into this issue of homelessness that you brought up here. You made a promise on the campaign trail to establish 1,000 new shelter units in the first year of your term, 4,000 over the 4 years of your term. You've recently submitted some legislation to the City Council to go down this path. I know you'd really like to stand up 500 units by June in time for the World Cup. Tell us about that legislation. Give us the big picture about how you'd like it to work.
Yeah, so we are aiming for 500 units in the first half of this year. And the legislation that we transmitted to council is kind of part of the picture of what we need for this to work. Some of it is unlocking some funding. Some of it is increasing the size of the number of tiny houses that can be in a village,
right.
In a way that would allow us to take a few of the successful sites that already exist and potentially build on them.
Yeah.
Yes. And then the other piece is really, it's a little bit more technical, but it's really about allowing the city to kind of sign the contracts and kind of centralize the process of preparing sites as opposed to kind of farming that out to service providers.
Yeah, so it can go a little more quickly and making that happen. The permit process can be cleared. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. I did want to talk about the way this might be paid for and some of the challenges with it. You're pulling together $17.5 million in funds from the city budget from different sources to pay for these 500 units. Council staff had some issues with this, and I wanted to read a few blips from their report here. One quote: "No certainty about the number of units that will be created with this $17.5 million and the ongoing operation cost obligations." The report also said it is not at all clear that passage of this legislation would result in 500 new units of shelter by June 1st, 2026, before World Cups begin, which is the executive's shared goal, or stated goal, I should say. I just want to make sure I ask those big questions. How many units are you actually going to have online in 2 months, and how will you pay for those ongoing costs?
Yeah, and I mean, we've set a big, ambitious goal, 500, 1,000 this year, 4,000 in my first term, right? And I think the point here is to really get us all moving in the same direction with urgency and kind of recognizing the scale of the challenge that we are trying to address. And also, just to be clear, I mean, we're putting big numbers out in terms of units, but I really don't think that the number of shelter units is the most important metric. Okay. What I really want to do is dramatically decrease unsheltered homelessness in our city, because we know that the number of people who are sleeping unsheltered on our streets without a home and without even shelter is astronomical. Thousands of people. Our rates are much higher than even our peer cities across the country. And so
in terms of who's homelessness,
absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
And so we're really looking at tackling that problem at scale, and we're doing the things we need to get there. So will we meet our mark? I hope so. But I think we're moving in the right direction, and we're going to be soon discussing some specific sites with the public and with the council. And so I'm really hopeful that we're headed in a good direction. Lots of great partners, and we're also seeking philanthropic support. So some of this will probably be privately funded. I think the really important thing is that we know that we don't just need a bed or even just a tiny house, but a lot of folks coming out of homelessness, especially if they have complex needs related to substance use disorder, mental illness, need a lot of support. And so we're being very intentional, especially in these first sites that we're standing up, to make sure that we have those wraparound services on site that we know that a lot of people are going to need to be successful there. So we're putting a lot of energy into that as well. And we also know that the one-time kind of capital startup cost is one thing, but it is very important to have that ongoing funding for operations. So as my team is really looking through the city budget and preparing for this fall's budget process, we're going to be working very hard to make sure that we have those ongoing operating funds in the budget.
Got it. Now, in terms of how the council has been wrestling with this, I've been trying to track it over the past couple weeks. I think there's definitely support going on there. They want this to be successful too, and to do that, you really do need that buy-in from neighborhoods, et cetera. It feels like a balance to me between the speed that you'd like to go and making sure people are vetting this. Do you sense that balance there, or that struggle there, I guess?
Absolutely, and I think that's exactly it, right? It's we know that we need to move with urgency and at scale, and that's going to mean everyone pulling together, right? And we also know that people welcoming a shelter or a tiny house village in their neighborhood also want to make sure that they know that it's going to be well run and that it's not going to have big negative impacts on the neighborhood. And so we're sensitive to that, and making sure to do the kind of outreach that we need to do, and most importantly, just having really good plans in place both for those on-site services and for public safety, and make sure that we're prepared to really remain in constant communication with residents, with businesses, with others in the neighborhood, so that we can make sure that this is successful.
Can you touch briefly on the role the King County Regional Homelessness Authority might play here? Because as I see it, some of the funding you might end up using for this project is money that was originally earmarked for the KCRHA. Do I have that right?
So the funding that we have now identified in the city budget is not KCRHA funding. That's funding within Seattle's budget. And we're really, at least for these initial sites, we're kind of doing it in-house at the city. And at the same time, I'm now a new board member of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. So obviously there's a larger conversation there around the authority's role and, working with also
should the city be doing this? Should the KCRHA be doing this? That's the question.
Right. And I think those conversations are ongoing.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I know we'll hear more about that in the months upcoming. I want to move on to another big issue in terms of an early part of your term here. Surveillance cameras. You held a town hall on this recently. You can watch it right here on the Seattle channel if you'd like. You've put a pause on the expansion of this program, an expansion the City Council approved last year, but you're not going to shut down the 62 cameras the city is currently using. I remember you telling me on the campaign trail you had a lot of concerns about how these cameras could be used to potentially target immigrants in our community or women looking for reproductive health services. Has your stance shifted on surveillance cameras? How would you describe that?
So I still have all those concerns that I expressed during the campaign around the ways that our surveillance could be misused if it falls into the hands of the federal government. And really, that's why we're doing this pause on the expansion, pending an audit, which will take a few months, basically, of the city's data sharing, storage, kind of security practices. So we're really trying to do that due diligence to figure out like, what are the vulnerabilities in this system? What are the risks that we're taking? What can we do to mitigate those risks? And actually, we are shutting one camera off. So there's one particular camera which is near a facility that offers reproductive and gender-affirming care.
That's right.
And so we are, taking the precaution of shutting that camera off, also pending this audit. And to be clear, SPD and the Real-Time Crime Center, they were actually masking that area, but we just want to make absolutely sure that we're not collecting sensitive data that could be misused.
Okay. I know a lot of people who supported your campaign might be saying, wait a minute, I thought we were getting rid of these cameras. What do you tell them?
I mean, well, first, to be clear, I never said I'm going to shut off all the cameras. So I expressed concerns about the expansion. And I think this is just really a legitimately complicated issue with really strong feelings on both sides and real considerations on both sides, right? And so, these cameras, from what I've seen, and I think, just to note the other thing that's going on, because the cameras themselves that are in place, it is a pilot, right? And the cameras are currently on North Aurora, kind of downtown business district, and the Chinatown International District. They only started operating basically in spring of last year. So this is a fairly new program. And there's an evaluation going on this year, which will give us a better idea of how those cameras are being used and what kind of public benefit basically we are getting from them. Okay. From what I have seen through my staff's visits to the Real-Time Crime Center and conversations with SPD, they are legitimately useful in solving crimes, right? Including serious crimes like homicides, right? And there's real value in that, right? Both for victims' families, and just the broader community, right? We live in a rule-based society, right? There's value in solving crimes. And so I think that can't be discounted. And then on the other side, there are legitimate concerns about privacy and about, data security and all that.
I want to talk about what's next with these cameras. So your administration is going through an audit of this technology with help from the New York University's Policing Project, an organization that helps with police accountability and transparency. Councilmember Bob Kettle put out a statement about that, specifically with the expansion of cameras in the Stadium District. He said, in part, declining to turn on the Stadium District closed-circuit TV cameras without evidence of a credible threat is a decision I do not support. The FIFA World Cup puts Seattle on the world stage, and with the number of people we are expecting, that makes FIFA football matches or the surrounding fan fest events a target for bad faith actors. We cannot risk safety at this critical time. I know that Councilmember Kettle supports the audit. He has said that, but he's really pushing to get these stadium cameras up and going and running by June 1st. Is that going to happen? So, and to be clear, just for context, so the expansion that the council approved last year would place cameras in 3 additional neighborhoods. The Stadium District was one of those 3. The Central District near Garfield was another of those, and then the Capitol Hill Nightlife District. Right. So that's what we put on pause. We're making a partial exception to that pause in the sense that we are going to move forward with installing the 20 cameras that were slated for the Stadium District. Because of the World Cup coming, but not turn them on unless there is a credible threat. So that is our position at the moment, and we're working with SPD to figure out kind of what is that threshold of a credible threat. And so we are installing them because there is this big mega event with lots of complexity to it, and so we want to be prepared to use those cameras if it feels warranted. At the same time, I would just caution against getting too hung up on this, because the fact is there's going to be a lot of safety and security protocol and actors kind of in the vicinity for that event. Okay. I mean, first of all, if you just think about the stadium area, there are tons of cameras around the stadium area. And there's this whole area that's being basically pedestrianized around Pioneer Square for the event. Right. There's going to be, car-proof barriers, and there's going to be lots of law enforcement, both our own law enforcement, other law enforcement coming in, federal agents as well. Okay. So, we are not, there was no moment at which we felt like we needed these cameras for any kind of basic safety and security. So I just don't want to get too hung up on the importance of these cameras in the context of that event. Thank you for breaking that down. One of the biggest concerns about cameras is that federal immigration officials could obtain that footage from Seattle, as they have in other cities, use that video to target immigrants. I know you were talking a lot about Trump-proofing Seattle on the campaign trail. Has Seattle been successful in Trump-proofing itself? I know the cameras are just part of that. Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, SPD does not share footage from the cameras with federal agencies, right? And, just to address some of the concern, for example, around
flock ALPR cameras that have been used in other cities was that there was like an automatic setting on those cameras where data was shared automatically with other agencies, including federal agencies. That is not the case with this. So here we have local
ALPR, automated license plate readers.
It gets very complicated, but the main point is that we are not sharing data with federal authorities from these cameras, and we would know if a request came in for that data. And if and when there is some kind of like really stepped up ICE activity, like for example we saw in Minneapolis, we will shut those cameras down, right? So just to be clear, this is not, data sharing is not something that is happening.
Okay, thank you for that. I want to talk city budget with you, if I could. You've inherited a budget with a $140 million deficit, which I know you know very well. You've asked city departments to look at a 5 to 10% reduction in their budgets as a start. Beyond that, talk to me about how you're approaching the budget season this year. How do you get the city back in the black?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really challenging issue, and it's, the city has had this structural budget deficit for years now, right? So this is not like a surprise. This is not a new problem.
Right.
And I mean, basically, this is like the city facing a lot of the same cost pressures that individuals and families are, right? Inflation, everything's getting more expensive. And then some specific city issues like the fact that our, property tax does not increase with inflation. It's actually capped at a 1% increase. And so this creates a structural problem in our general fund specifically. And so the approach of the previous administration was really kind of duct tape, like kludging things together, one-time fixes. And so we're in a position where we do have this ongoing, we don't know exactly what the magnitude is, but at least like $150 million a year deficit. We don't want to make $150 million a year in cuts. Like that would be pretty devastating. So we have asked departments to model 5 and 10% cuts. But we are looking at our options in terms of new revenue to not have to make those cuts. And I'm not going to give a lot of detail here about what those options are, because that's just something that my team is working on internally. But we definitely don't want to be having to present an austerity budget to the council. I will say that at the same time, we are also taking a very close look at all the ways that the city is spending money. And I do think that it's important to prioritize. And if there are programs that aren't working the way we want them to work, I think we can't be afraid to shift money to things that are working.
Thanks. I wanted to go down that path of revenue and where it's coming from, because you mentioned recently at the Downtown Seattle Association's State of the City event that it's not ideal for Seattle's tax environment to be wildly out of step with neighboring jurisdictions. The DSA brought this up. Downtown Seattle has lost 37,000 jobs over the past 5 years. Downtown Bellevue has had 12% job growth. There's taxes on big businesses. I know that's a big part of the reason why the budget for the city of Seattle actually stayed the way it does. You know the Jumpstart tax because you introduced it as just a member of the public several years ago. But I wanted to get to that question of how can you convince businesses not to move jobs elsewhere if this concept of taxing big businesses, taxing the rich is still very much in front of them and on the table?
I think there's a couple of things to say here. So one is, as we're looking at progressive revenue options, we're definitely looking at ones where we are, asking the wealthiest individuals and/or corporations to pay more, but we want to do that in a way that is not changing Seattle's business environment for companies that are operating here and creating a deeper incentive to, for example, move to Bellevue. So we're sensitive to that as we're looking at progressive revenue options, I would say. Now, I'm not taking increases in Jumpstart off the table because we're going to have to make some hard decisions. So I think that's a conversation that we'll have. But I definitely would much prefer to be looking at revenue options that are not creating more of a differential between our business environment and Bellevue's. But the other thing that I'll say is that, businesses care about taxes, of course, but they care about a lot of other things too. And I think when you talk to business owners about what makes Seattle a good environment to operate on versus other cities, there are other things that matter a lot. And I would say that homelessness and public safety matter a lot. It matters to the companies, it matters to their workforce, of course, right? And so that's one area where I think there's really strong alignment between my administration and the business community and frankly just the general public of wanting to see progress. And so we're really leaning into that and really partnering with the business community on making progress on the homelessness crisis and on really figuring out how can we address some of these public safety issues that are impacting downtown, but also other neighborhoods in a way that makes it a hard place to do business. So I think that's an area where we can make a lot of progress. And then, Seattle's got a lot going for us too. I mean, we're it's just beautiful, natural beauty, just like lots of great arts and culture, right? So there's a lot of reasons why companies would want to operate here. And I think if we can make some improvements on some of those key areas, then, it's like, again, taxes are important, but they're not the only thing.
I guess the overall question I'm trying to get to is, do you think Seattle has become unfriendly to business in some way?
No.
Okay. All right. That's what you're hearing from businesses, or what are you hearing from businesses you're talking to?
I mean, again, I think I'm hearing that they care a lot about making progress on the homelessness crisis and on public safety. And I think, different businesses are different, right? But I think that there's a lot of businesses, large and small, that are really deeply invested in this city and in this community, that want the city to be successful, that love being here, and I think that they want a lot of what all of us want. It's just for Seattle to be a great place to live, work, and raise a family.
Got it. There's another budget issue I really wanted to talk to you about: Seattle's CARE teams, Community Assisted Response and Engagement. These are the civilian 911 alternative response teams that can respond to person down calls that don't necessarily need an armed police officer. So recently, CARE Chief Amy Barden said that the contract the city negotiated before you were in office with the Seattle Police Officers Guild has prevented CARE teams essentially from doing their job. She said the 24 responders who are out there right now are only fulfilling 28% of their capacity. She doesn't want to waste their expertise, doesn't want to waste money here. I know you've been a big supporter of 911 alternatives. How do you resolve the situation with CARE? Does the SPOG contract need to be renegotiated? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the contract's not ideal, but I really think, and in conversations with Chief Barden and Chief Barnes, I think we're making a lot of progress. Basically, we can, respecting the contract, I think we can really still use CARE to its fullest. So we're working on creative ways to do that, and part of that is that the contract is really focused on what happens with 911 calls, but if there are other routes where
they could be proactive potentially.
Exactly, right. We're looking at a partnership with the libraries and just ways that, I mean, there's no shortage of work out there, right? Like there's no shortage of, unfortunately, there's no shortage of crises on our streets, right? And so it's really just being creative about how we utilize these like skilled workers to go out there and provide that care and get people into stable situations. And so I'm confident that we can do that. And it's unfortunate that we have the restrictions that we have in that contract, and we will be working on that as we go toward the next cycle of negotiations with SPOG. But in the meantime, I don't think that we're going to have a problem utilizing that team.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to mention something. Back in February, the City Council approved the transfer of $115 million towards a social housing program. I wanted to talk about this because this was a very important part of your campaign. Your support of that new funding mechanism for it was a big reason why you got into this race for mayor. What impact is this investment going to have when it comes to affordable housing, and when might Seattle see some of these units come online?
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. I mean, I think there was a lot of excitement when we saw that the revenue coming in from this new tax was significantly higher than anyone projected, and so that means that the new social housing developer, has the money that it needs to begin acquiring and developing property. And I don't want to. I know they're working on a lot of things behind the scenes, so I don't want to make some kind of public announcement. But I think we're very optimistic that they'll be able to make their first really significant property acquisition this year, so that we'll see units beginning to open up. And my understanding of their strategy is that they're both looking at an acquisition strategy where they would buy existing buildings and turn that into social housing, and also they're looking at development specifically of family-sized units. And we know that that is just a huge kind of gap in our housing system.
There's a lack of those for sure.
That there's a huge lack of family-sized units of 2, 3, 4 bedroom apartments, and so I think they're really well positioned to begin to fill that gap in a way that is affordable for families. And I think just to go back to when you were asking me about what businesses care about, I think it's also really important to realize that the affordability crisis that workers are facing is an issue for their employers, right? Like as an employer, how are you going to recruit and retain a great workforce if the people working for you can't afford to live in this city? So I think it's really important to emphasize that kind of area of common ground. And because I think there's a lot on both the housing crisis, the child care, like all these aspects of the affordability crisis. I think that's also kind of concerns that are broadly shared, including with the business community. And so I'm really hopeful that even if there were some differences of opinion about how to fund the social housing developer, hopefully we'll be able to have a partnership in really building out this non-market housing sector.
This feels like just one piece of the much larger affordability issue that
Yeah.
I know I was talking to you about this on the campaign trail too. Do you feel like you've delivered on some of the things you wanted to do there when you were campaigning in terms of bringing more affordability to Seattle? What can you say?
So we're 100 days in, so give me a little time.
All right, we're getting there. Right.
But yeah, I mean, we are working on a number of strategies around the housing crisis, and part of that is obviously social housing, and the city really working closely with the social housing developers so that we're beginning to expand that, permanently affordable, publicly owned, mixed income housing that we all want to see. But there's other things too, right? And part of this is also recognizing that a lot of that part of the housing crisis that we now face comes from the fact that as Seattle's been growing over the last 10 or 20 years, we really haven't added housing supply to match. And that partly has to do with our land use and zoning rules and how hard we make it to permit new development and all of that. So that's another whole area that we're tackling. And I actually just made an announcement earlier this week that we're going to be accelerating the next couple phases of Seattle's comprehensive plan and aiming to go bigger on things like allowing, multi-story building, within a walking distance of frequent transit corridors and things like that. And so that's another piece of this, and continuing and stepping up the work internally on our permitting processes to try to make sure that it doesn't take 2 years to begin to develop something. So there's a lot there as well. Renter protections is another aspect of this, and we did put out a survey to renters, which we had like 9,000 respondents, so it was really cool. But that's informing legislation that we're now developing around regulating or banning various rental quote-unquote junk fees, or these kind of fees that you're hit with as a renter that you don't really know until you read the fine print of your lease, and some of which is really not clear that you're getting anything for that.
I see.
So there's a lot of kind of dimensions on which we're tackling the housing crisis.
Need to do the 30-second version with you if I can. What's the latest on the Sonics returning to Seattle? Everyone wants to know.
I don't want to jinx anything, but I think it's looking good.
Okay, that's a good sign.
I mean, I think people probably know. So the where we're at in the stage right now is that the NBA has announced that they would like to expand into Seattle, and so right now what's happening is basically the question is, can an ownership group come together and cobble together the who knows how many $1 billion is going to be required to fund a team.
I guess I would say if your term this first year encompasses a Seahawks Super Bowl win, the World Cup, Mariners winning a World Series, and the Sonics returning to Seattle, do you just automatically get Mayor of the Year? How does that work?
I think I become mayor for life at that point.
We'll see how that goes. Let me try for one more question here. I wanted to ask about something that you were talking about during your State of the City. Perhaps setting up an intra-governmental soccer game before the World Cup. What's going on?
Yeah, no, I am going to be inviting elected officials around our region to come play soccer. And we'll see how many people are interested, right? Maybe it's one game, maybe it's a little tournament. But I just really think that a lot of people, maybe people who can't afford a World Cup ticket, would like to come and watch for free their elected officials embarrass themselves on a soccer field. I
got to say, I did ask Councilmember Hollingsworth and Foster when they were on the show recently if they were up for playing the game. They said no dice. I mean,
what?
I know. Is this a situation where maybe you hire on Megan Rapinoe as an advisor for a few days, or what's the plan?
I mean, I want to be clear that this is going to be fun.
Okay.
So, you're not expected to be good.
Okay.
And I think it'll be more fun if we're not that good. So I, open invitation, all the elected officials, I'm sure who are watching this, come play ball. It's going to be fun.
I can't wait for that. And we will be right back.
What are people saying online about Mayor Wilson's policies at the 100-day mark? One person says, the excuse that someone is going to track down immigrants with surveillance cameras is nonsense. Let's now start watching the data on crime where these cameras were working and see how crime will increase or decrease. Another comments, Mayor Wilson is getting input from multiple perspectives and balancing interests. Finding acceptable compromises is what effective governing is all about. We'd like to know what you think. Email us at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on social media.
Good to have that input and great to have you on the show. Mayor Wilson, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, and we will see you next time on City Inside Out.